So the question is that motion be agreed to. The Honourable Jacqui Boydell.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise today to specifically talk about the review that's being conducted by the Department of Transport into regulated public transport services in regional WA, and there's a buzz in the air, and it's not extra planes in all of our towns and the people that I talk to, because we're coming to the department and the minister making some announcements on what those regional air routes will be. So it is a timely and an important matter for the House to discuss that today. So in light of the release of the Department of Transport's final report of the review of the regulated public transport air routes in Western Australia earlier this year, and the implementation of the Western Australian aviation strategy, I wanted to talk today, or I rise today to discuss the importance of the regular public transport air routes to regional Western Australia, which are vital to the economic and social development of our state. So air routes in regional Western Australia are like catching the bus in Perth. It's like using the train service. It's like using a taxi. It creates connectivity to the metropolitan area. It allows people to travel internationally, interstate, and it allows people to, from a social perspective, meet medical appointments, visit their family, and visit other regions of Western Australia, because you must fly to the metropolitan area from anywhere in regional WA to actually then on-fly to other areas of the state. So it's an extremely important service that's supplied to the people who live in regional Western Australia, and it's raised with me every day. Why is it less expensive to fly to Bali than it is to fly to Carnarvon? Why is that? And it is difficult to have that conversation when you're out and about in the local community. And it's a dent in the armour of the tourism industry in regional Western Australia. And if we see the beautiful areas of regional WA as the Kimberley and the Gascoyne and the Pilbara, and certainly down south as well, as major tourist destinations for Western Australia, we've got to get this public transport air route system right. And with this current review going on, there's an opportunity to do that. So what I want out of this discussion today, and hopefully from some members, is to bring to the table some ideas and issues that they've certainly seen in their electorates around how local people affordably access air services in regional Western Australia. The conversation's particularly relevant given the existing, as I mentioned, the existing deeds that between the state government and the incumbent regular public transport airlines expire as of February 2016, with rights to be awarded to those routes by the end of this year, following a competitive tender process that's been undergoing currently. And it's also timely given recent media attention surrounding the excessive cost of regional air travel on deregulated air routes, particularly in the Pilbara region and in the Kimberley region. And I wanted to highlight and start my contribution by emphasising that the provision of aviation services in regional WA is an issue that's incredibly important to the people of the mining and pastoral electorate that I represent, and the reason for that is because of the vastness of our state and the vastness of the mining and pastoral electorate in particular. As we know, our state is enormous and it covers approximately 1/3 of the Australian continent, and efficient transport and communication is completely dependent on reliable aviation services. Air travel is often the only practical long-distance travel option for people who live in the mining and pastoral electorate, and I'm sure other electorates as well. And I know I experienced this myself just as a member trying to get around the electorate, where there are air services to larger regional centres, trying to get to smaller centres where there are no regional air services is very difficult. And so for the people who live in those areas, how they connect with the rest of the state and indeed globally is a real challenge for them, absolutely. While districts within the mining and pastoral region vary considerably in terms of what their tourism aspirations are, what resources they have in the area, commercial and corporate entities are different, and the requirement for them to travel is often different, and the social and demographic of those districts are different and complex as well. But what is shared is that those regional communities all share a common need for connectivity through accessible, reliable, affordable and quality airline services. Reliable airline transport services underpin the viability of the commercial corporate sectors in our regions and are essential to the social wellbeing of local communities, as I alluded to earlier. When people have to visit a specialist, we've often talked about PATs in this house, they have to travel by air. If they want to come and see their family who live in the metropolitan area or indeed other parts of the state, they have to travel by air. Where I come from in Carnarvon, the air travel is about 2 hours, just over 2 hours, as opposed to a 10-hour road trip. So often your only option, particularly in medical circumstances, is to travel by air. And when you need that service, just like when you need the train to be on time in Perth, you need that service to be providing you with safe, reliable transport, and you want it to be on time and you want to be able to get there and address the issues that you've got. And that is a challenge for airlines as well. It's a challenge to deliver a high expectation of service into regional WA, and I am going to talk about that a little down into my contribution today. Aviation, there's no doubt, has played a fundamental role in our state's past development and will continue to do so into the future. But it's on what terms and the nature of the regulatory environment that has proven contentious and will continue to do so if we don't get this right in this review process. Following the collapse of ANZET in 2001, regional air routes were regulated to protect those vulnerable interstate air routes. Despite the deregulation of more profitable routes in Western Australia since that time, air travel, whether regulated or deregulated, has remained expensive and not accessible to many people who live in regional WA. It is simply too expensive. Many pensioners who live in regional WA do get, through their Centrelink entitlement, one trip a year to the metropolitan area, and that's often the only time they would ever come to the metro area because it's simply not affordable to get here. WA's aviation industry is affected by a number of economic factors, including the volatility of the resource industry sector. No doubt about that. We've seen where we've gone from construction phase in the Pilbara to now operational phase. We don't have the amount of traffic going in and out. You only have to catch one of those flights to Port Hedland in the early hours of the morning on any given day, and you note that the demand has fallen, but prices are still high. So although the resource industry has driven the prices up because it's been competitive, there's now no longer that demand, but the prices are still up. Prices are still high. So there's got to be some fluctuation from those airlines in recognising demand and trying to attract people to utilise their services as well. Otherwise that then becomes, do they continue to provide the service? And we certainly don't want to see that in regional WA for sure. The industry's also got some other variable factors that they have to accommodate, and that's fuel costs, elevated costs associated with takeoff and landing fees, passenger security levies and ageing aircraft, which are all reflected in the high price of airfares on many routes. And that's why this is such a complex issue, because there are many factors that are brought in line to when you talk about a price of an airline ticket. Key issues for Western Australian aviation include, for people using it, airlines' on-time performance, Fluctuations in passenger demand is something that airlines need to consider, but I don't see them considering that. We certainly don't see it in the price of the airline ticket. And service quality on some routes. On some routes we're at a charter service, and on other routes in regional WA we've got a leisure craft. We need to bring some balance back to that, and that relates solely back to tourism for sure. Further still, airlines operating interstate flights in WA face a significant challenge of great distances, also paired with low population bases. So what they do in the eastern states in regional areas is not going to work here. It's a unique environment in Western Australia. We've got large distances. We do have a lower population base. There needs to be some more dynamic thinking from the state government and the Department of Transport and the Minister in the terms of how they contract these services back to the airlines to make sure that the people that we represent are getting a quality service. And that's why I wanted to have this debate today, because that review is being undertaken as we speak, and there are final outcomes of those reviews being discussed. And what we really need to be careful of is not allowing airlines to cherry pick regional air routes, because if they can do that in the negotiation phase with the Department of Transport, they will, because they don't want to have to service lower profitable air routes. And then we end up with essentially charter services delivering regulated public transport service to large regional towns, and that just doesn't work. That's been a case in point in the airline services delivered after the 2011 public transport review into my hometown of Carnarvon. Skippers Aviation were awarded that route. Essentially, Skippers Aviation are a charter service, and they took on, I think it was a surprise to them at the time as well, they took on that air route to continue to provide that service to the people of Carnarvon, and they have they've continued to do that, at times been in a challenging environment. What I would say is that at the time that was announced, it did cause great outcry in the region, and certainly key stakeholders I know have made submissions to the review process the department undertook, outlining the issues that created for businesses and the local community and the outlying communities of Carnarvon. So I don't know if anyone's travelled on Skippers Aviation. I know myself and other members of the Mining and Pastoral Region have, where you're not based out of the main terminal. It's quite difficult to get to. There's limited parking. There's no connectivity for travel agents to book international onward flights. There's also no availability for people searching in, say, the UK, for example, to undertake a flight into the Coral Coast, because Skippers Aviation don't have a connectivity to that international booking circuit. So it did create some difficulty, but I do take my hat off to Skippers Aviation. They have continued to provide a service to that community, and it is valued, but I would suggest that the people of that community would like to see some consideration given back to them to increase the level and quality and reliability of service, to bring them back into line and allow them, the tourism industry particularly, an even playing field with the rest of regional WA and getting people to visit, which of course makes the area more vibrant. What I can only reiterate, when we're in this very critical stage where government is having those negotiations with airlines about the regional airline routes and what we're going to essentially end up with, don't allow the airlines to cherry pick those routes, and don't allow the people on the remaining air routes to have a lesser service. What we need to see is a coastal network. We need a connected network throughout Western Australia that provides viability through passenger numbers for the airlines. It meets their requirements in terms of profitability, and I understand that. and I want to see those airlines continue to see Western Australia as a viable option for them and not all disappear to the eastern states. So I would suggest that regulation and deregulation has not worked, and let's see a connected network. Thank you.
Members.